every single person on Twitter is telling me about the Bernie Sanders fish thing.
Didn't that happen like a day or two ago?
I don't know.
Well, you can lump them in with all the people telling me about the latest aftermarket for Ferrari with my name on it.
We got to talk about that. This could be our pre-show neutral. There is a Ferrari. Now, how do they say it? Is it Siracusa, or do they say it a different way?
This is not a new thing. This company has done this to every mid-engine V8 Ferrari for like the past 3 generations. Like they always look yellow and black. They're always kind of gaudy. They always have that same name.
They always have the name Siracusa?
Yeah, well, it's some. What's the first part? Starts with an M or something.
Masonry.
It's like an aftermarket tuner, like
rough.
Yeah, or what's the BMW one? Starts with a D.
Denon. I don't know how it's said.
Dynan is how I've always pronounced it.
It's pronounced Siracusa.
Saline for Mustangs, and Anyway, they do this all the time. But every time it comes out, someone sees it for the first time, and they tell me about it.
I've never seen this before.
You have? I have sent you the picture of like the 458 version.
I've never seen it either.
I'm telling you, I don't think you've said this to
I
us
think
before.
I also sent you maybe the one. I didn't know you before that, but you've seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it's just like an aftermarket modder that mods and resells messed up Ferraris with your name on them?
Yep.
Cool. All right.
and they're always yellow and black, which some people find gaudy. So do I. Like, I would never pick those colors, but I don't think they're as hideous as a lot of people do. I mean, it's like, if you're going to go yellow and black, it's sure as hell is yellow and black, isn't it? I mean, it's like the lime green Lamborghinis or whatever. Like some people like that for their exotic cars.
Out of curiosity, so kind of like to pass the John test here, if you were given one of these, would you sell it for a different one?
Yep.
Or would you keep this one?
Sell.
Okay.
Because, you'd get good money for it. It would have no miles on it. It would be brand new. And these specially modified ones, like they do, for people who want this, they're all lightened and have extra carbon fiber in them and all this other stuff. You'd get good money for it. You could buy a standard. I would rather have a box stock, boring red one than this.
I like to think in my peaceful, happy place in my mind that people who would have the means to buy a Ferrari like this would have better taste than to choose this one.
But I don't think it's that bad. Like, I don't think it's untasteful. Like, for example, I think the baby food metallic orange, weird or mustardy kind of yellow BMWs are unpleasing. This looks like a Matchbox car.
I'll give you that.
If you're going for that look, it's like, don't go halfway. If you want to have like fins and flares and extreme contrasting colors, like this is that, and it is a reasonable execution of that. I think it is a valid aesthetic. Like it's like the old difference between Lamborghini and Ferrari. Lamborghini was always how many intakes and ducts and sharp angles and fins and wedges and stuff can we put on there, and Ferrari was a little bit smoother. And this is kind of like taking a Ferrari and going in the Lamborghini direction. So I don't think it's actually ugly. I just think it's too loud for my taste. But I think it is a competent execution of that style.
So if you were given one, immediately sell.
Yep.
I think I would too.
Oh, I absolutely would. But
it's worth good money. Like you would get more money than selling a regular one because it is more rare and it has desirable characteristics for people who want to race them or whatever you want to do with this thing.
I don't know. Sometimes mods make something less valuable. I would venture to say that most mods make cars less valuable.
Not for aftermarket things. Like, again, if you got a BMW with a bunch of aftermarket modifications, that is desirable for anyone who wants an aftermarket modified BMW. They will give you more money than a fresh off the lot stock BMW.
Honestly, well, when I did buy a used BMW, I specifically sought one out that was unmodified, and then when I went. I had to drive to Maryland to see the one I found, and the windows were all tinted, and I'm like, oh, I didn't want that, But I figured that's easy to undo, so I bought that one, brought it home, and immediately brought it to a tint place to remove all the tint.
I didn't know that. Is that right?
Yeah. That was the one. It was chipped also. It was like ECU modded.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not a modder, so I don't really understand the whole deal with it or the whole culture behind it. So I just assume that it's just not for me.
Well, it depends on what you're after, right? Like, I agree with you that I would never, ever, ever buy a car that I've known to be modified. But that being said, I put a chip in my car, which is to say, I mean, it's not. I say put a chip in it. It's all software. There's no physical bits to it. But I did that to my car. I have a Cobb on it, and I like it. but
A what?
It's a COB. It's COBB. It's the company that that has a box that lets you reprogram the computer. And so that's what I've done to my car. And it's better for sure. It's faster and I like it. But I wouldn't say that it's night and day better. And this is the first car I can remember that I've done any sort of real modification to. I've never tinted a car, even though I kind of would like to, but it's not worth it. I've never put aftermarket wheels on a car. Oof, not worth that.
You should have seen how ridiculous I looked getting out of a car with black tinted windows.
I actually kind of am sad that I didn't.
It lasted less than a week. That was literally the first thing I did when I brought her home. Like I drove it home, and I think that same day I called a tint place to schedule an appointment to get it taken off.
That's not surprising. John, have you ever done any sort of mods to your car?
No, but if I did, I would do the ones of the aftermarket tuners that I described before, like where they do things that try to make the car better. Like, so lightweight parts. Take some part that's heavy and put in a part that is equally strong but lighter. Like, that's always good, right? Or, inside the engine, if you could change like titanium connecting rods to get to increase the red line or whatever. Like, those type of modifications seem to me more significant. Exactly the same things that the M division does, that AMG does, or whatever. Changes that actually make the car better in whatever way you want to make the car better. Less window tinting and custom paint and ground effects, and more of the things that the manufacturer would do to make the car better.
Indeed. All right. Well, I'm sad that you would not be a fan of the Ferrari Siracusa. I don't know if the roles were reversed and that was the Ferrari Lys, how could you not? Although that would be a terrible
It's
name.
nice that it has your name all over the thing, but that's not what I want out of a Ferrari. I want it to be red. Call me crazy.
What would a Ferrari Lys be?
I don't even know.
Of course, it'd be white. That's it. We're done.
Same as it ever was.
He'd get the 4-wheel drive. He'd get the 4-wheel drive one, right? The ugly 4-wheel drive one.
Oh, would you two stop?
That's what you want.
Yeah, that's it. All right, can we move on to follow-up? I probably should have done some research about the mono Xamarin confusion, and we got a handful of emails about this, and I promptly looked at them and said, yeah, it's whatever. And then I archived them. Do you want to take a stab, John, to explain?
I was going to stop you when you were saying it during the show, but I figured just to let it slide and no one really cares. But apparently a lot of people care. I don't know all the details of this, but I at least know that Mono was the name, was not interchangeable with Xamarin. Xamarin was a company name. Mono was the name of the open source implementation of .NET, and they're related to each other, but it's not as if Mono became Xamarin. And some people wrote us to tell us things that we talked about on previous shows, that what Xamarin was doing is making a way for you to write iOS applications by writing in C# to use their framework, and you could deploy to iOS and other platforms and stuff. And Microsoft buying them gives them a company that lets you write applications in C# and have them run on more than just Windows Phone. Didn't we have a whole show where we talked about that, like what it would be like to write an iOS app in C#?
We talked about it a long time ago, so long ago that it's not likely I'm going to bother putting it in the show notes.
Yeah. But anyway, I think the only people who care are people who already know the intricacies better than we do. And the people who don't, we can just leave it at, if you want to know more details about it, look it up. What we said on the last show was a little bit muddled. But then again, this whole thing I feel like is a little bit muddled, like trying to figure out what they're doing with this technology. What products does Xamarin have now versus what is Microsoft buying? They're buying the people, the expertise. Do they care? How much do they care about the products that the company has now versus the company that Microsoft wants them to build, or maybe take what they've already built and modified in one way or another? And there was this flurry of stories about it. You mentioned some of them too, Casey, like the past few weeks, about Microsoft's various projects to let people run applications from other mobile platforms on Windows Mobile. So, take your iOS app and run it on Windows Phone or on Windows 10 or whatever, and we'll run Android apps, or you'll be able to recompile your Android apps for Windows Phone. I forget what they were called. Weren't they all kinds of woods, island wood,
something like that,
pine wood? Anyway, obviously we're not keeping up on all these various projects. A couple of them were canned recently. A couple of them live on. It's all part of Microsoft's ongoing struggle to figure out how to take what is, by all accounts, a reasonable mobile platform, at least as reasonable as Android, certainly better than Android was in Android's early days, and try to find a way to make it viable in the market. Because at this point, Android and iOS have so much momentum that they're just trying to, trying to get customers, trying to get developers. It's the really tough chicken egg situation that Apple found itself in with the Mac, where the PC just came to dominate, and no matter how much better the Mac was, it was just difficult to get people to develop for it. And one of the strategies people suggested is, Mac should run Windows programs, or it should be easy to write a program for Windows and port that program to the Mac. And Apple steadfastly held against that, saying, no, we don't want people to, and we know that might get people to port their applications, but those would be crappy Windows ports. We want people to write real Mac applications and be real Mac developers and do everything the right way. Was that a mistake? Would it have made no difference? I don't know. It's what Apple did. It's certainly kind of the high road. Microsoft is kind of trying everything at this point. What if we make it easier for you to take your iOS application and use some of that, some or all of that work to get that same application running on Windows? Would that help get developers? What if we will run Android apps, period? Just we'll take the binaries and run them somehow magically. Like all sorts of ideas to try to get some traction in the market. To my eyes, as someone who supported Apple's decisions not to license Mac OS and everything back in the days, I think those efforts are not going to help them. But, at least they're trying, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess. So I'm sorry to the people who are really into Mono and Xamarin and this whole ecosystem. I like John said, it's fairly confusing for me since I don't live and breathe it to keep it all apart. And I'm sorry I got that a little bit screwed up.
I'm sorry to both Windows Phone users for saying something wrong about your platform.
Please email Marco.
Our first sponsor this week is Audible.com, who has more than 180,000 audiobooks and spoken word audio products. Get a free 30-day trial at audible.com/ATP. If you want to listen to it, Audible has it. You can listen to audiobooks from virtually every genre, anytime, anywhere. You can play Audible's audiobooks on phones, tablets, computers, even iPods. Audiobooks are great for flights, long road trips, or even your daily commute. You might think you don't have time to read books, but you'd be surprised how many audiobooks you can hear each year, even if you only listen to and from work every day, because all that time adds up. Audiobooks bring books to life. Many of them are read by the authors themselves, which adds an extra dimension to the text. And you can take risks and try new authors and genres without regret, because Audible offers their great listen guarantee. If you start an audiobook and don't like it, you can exchange it for another one for free. So see and listen for yourself. When you begin your free 30-day trial, you get your first audiobook for free, and there's no stress or obligation because you can cancel your membership at any time. Now, with more than 180,000 audiobooks and spoken word audio products, you will find what you're looking for. Get a free 30-day trial today by signing up at audible.com/ATP. That's audible.com/ATP. Thanks to Audible for sponsoring our show.
So Apple made an oops in the last week.
Oh, jeez, this is bad. This is so bad.
It's not that bad. It's funny. But
it's bad.
The fix was really easy. All right, so what are we talking about here? Casey, you're the summarizer. So
I am the summarizer in chief, am I not? So my understanding of the situation was Apple has a mechanism by way they can blacklist kernel extensions. And I can't think of any particular examples offhand, but there are times when a kernel extension will go bad and they can blacklist it. And
it's usually used for malware. Like if they discover some kind of kernel extension malware, I think the intention of this system is for them to be able to very quickly disable it on all Macs, globally within a very short amount of time.
And the other example I can think of is the one from this thing, which is if they have a new version of an extension because they all know the old one had like an exploit or something like their own kernel extensions, they want to blacklist the old one so that people's Macs aren't exploitable because they'll give you a new one. Here, use this new one. And then, by the way, make sure the old one isn't ever loaded again because we know there's a problem with that one.
Yep.
Right. And this extends, like we're having clarification from tips from the chat room, this extends also to binaries, to apps. Like if they can blacklist any binary that is deemed malware. And so it really is a very good feature for malware to prevent the spread of it and to disable stuff that gets out there. So it's a good feature that I'm glad it's there. However, they messed something up this time.
Yeah. So it's important to note that these blacklist entries can ride without doing a formal software update. Of course, it's still some sort of software update that's happening behind the scenes, but the key is that it's happening behind the scenes. And so without any user intervention, you can just have this blacklist update happen to you, and things that are blacklisted will just magically go away. Well, I didn't really think much of this, or maybe I didn't even know about it. But then a few days ago, I could swear I saw Jason Snell saying, all of a sudden my iMac's Ethernet port isn't working anymore. Is anyone else seeing this? What's going on here? And mine was working on my iMac, so I didn't think much of it. And then fast forward about 24 hours, and it turns out that Apple blacklisted their own Ethernet driver. Whoops. Without
shipping a replacement. Because that's my understanding is that's where this went wrong. They had a new version of this driver. It's coming with like 10.11.4 or whatever, which is not out yet, I think, still. So they blacklisted the old one, and you're supposed to get the blacklist at the same time you get the upgrade to the new one. But instead, the blacklist for the old one went out, but the upgrade to the new one did not. So if you're Jason Snell, all of a sudden your Mac appears not to have an Ethernet port, or however this manifested. Like basically, Ethernet is not going to go because the kernel extension will not be loaded, and you have no replacement.
Yeah, and they did within a few hours maybe, like they did fairly quickly fix that with like the next definition, next version of the definitions that it downloads. But that didn't do you any good if you rebooted in the meantime there, and then you had no Ethernet with which to download that update. And not to mention the fact that like I think it's not like it comes up and tells you error dialog. Hey, your Ethernet kernel extension is no longer working because we deemed it insecure. Like they don't tell you anything; it just fails silently. Your Ethernet just disappears if you reboot.
These software updates, like they happen facelessly behind the scenes. You don't see them. They don't go through there's no spinner. There's no dialogue. There's no thing popping up. There's no like, oh, I see the Mac App Store launching. None of that happens. It just magically gets updated.
Yeah, and as far as I know, you can't disable it, right?
You probably can. You can disable anything.
I mean, you could like firewall it, but if like there's no setting to not do those, right?
Probably just rename the binary that it uses if it doesn't use like software update D or whatever. There's always ways to stop this stuff. But yeah, in general, for the regular person, there is no way. There's no button or checkbox or preference pane for you to not do that.
Right. And I mean, so, the good thing is, like, at least it didn't also affect Wi-Fi, so that probably cut down substantially on the number of computers that were affected by this.
Because who uses Ethernet, right?
Yeah, well, geeks like us. And a lot of people, turns out. But, I think what's most concerning about this, like, look, no one's perfect, but it just seems like this to me feels a lot like the same kind of problem as the whole Mac App Store certificate expiration problem that happened twice in the last few months. Just the latter one seemed to only happen to developers, but where it just seems like there's this really critical function of the system that something seemingly just rushed out there without being tested or with some degree of carelessness. And it doesn't bode well for the Mac when Apple seems to not be devoting the resources to what should be their most stable, secure platform. Like, the Mac should be a rock. It should be rock stable because it is mature. It's not changing that quickly anymore. It isn't like iOS where things are moving really fast and there's constantly new stuff. It's the rock. It should be stable. And the fact that they're doing things like this with some kind of failure in the process where things are getting out that break things pretty badly like this, it really makes me concerned for the process they have in place to validate these things and to test for these things, and for the overall amount of resources that they're giving the Mac. Because everything we keep hearing from people inside the company is that basically whenever there's like a new hot project, engineers get moved around like crazy. Like, there's constantly like engineers getting pulled off of certain projects or going to work at a more interesting group or whatever else. It seems like there's lots of internal moving of people around, and that often leaves things effectively staffless. And it feels to me from the outside like most of the Mac is effectively staffless. And that's concerning to me, and because what happens then when things are staffless like this inside Apple, what tends to happen is at some point, a year later, somebody dictates, hey, we need to have a new version of OS X with 10 new features or 100 new features or whatever. And then people kind of get temporarily brought in and they do this kind of like drive-by work, and then they go back to other stuff. And again, I don't know if this is how it works, but this is how it feels. And this kind of matches up with a little bit of things we've heard. And so it just seems like it seems like Apple does not dedicate resources full-time to things that I think need full-time resources. And that to me is very concerning.
I don't know what to make of it. I mean, on the one side, I feel like Apple's job as a hardware and software vendor is not to make this mistake. But just like we were talking about with the police officers earlier, everyone's human, everyone makes mistakes. I don't know if it's fair for us to try to assume what happened. I mean, I don't know if this is somebody dropped the ball. I don't know if this is somebody hit a button a little too early accidentally. It doesn't really matter, but certainly a lot of what we've talked about in a couple of different subjects over the last few episodes of the show is perception. And when we're already of the perception that Apple doesn't have the attention to detail that they used to, things like this doesn't really help. Similarly, another similar example is Stephen Hackett noticing just the other day, and I don't know how I never noticed this, that there's a really kind of crummy and semi-egregious typo in disk utility. And he says at the bottom of this post, while this may seem silly, because it's just a typo, it's not like functionally broken. While this may seem silly, it's this attention to detail stuff that worries me about Apple software. And that's, I think, why we're harping on this, is because companies of this size and companies that tout how much they pay attention to detail, they shouldn't really make mistakes like these. And if they do, they shouldn't be often. And granted, blacklisting an Ethernet driver is very, very different than transposing a couple of words in disk utility. But
you know what? Like, disk utility, like, first of all, like, that was part of a big disk utility update and redesign that probably didn't need to happen. I'm not familiar with the logic that went in behind it, but it was like, it's a system utility that got like basically a redesign that removed a bunch of features and made it look nicer. And it's like, only geeks were ever using this. Like, this didn't need to be made nicer in a way that negatively affected it. And it's like, you don't want disk utility of all things to have a drive-by sloppily done update. Like, a typo in disk utility is like a typo on your brake pads. Like, you really don't want any signs of carelessness in that. And so it worries me that it just seems like nothing is off limits for carelessness with the Mac and with what Apple's working on. And again, like, so many people, us included, depend on this platform to be stable and to be our rock, where we get our work done. It doesn't move that fast anymore, but we don't care. This is the stability here in an industry where all the mobile stuff is always up in the air and always crazy, and everything's constantly in beta. At best, we get to like a 0.2 or 0.3 point release on things before we get the next new version that's a total mess again. At least the Mac should be stable. It should be the rock. It should not be getting careless updates or careless actions, and it should not be short-staffed.
I don't know. I think the Ethernet driver, I don't consider that a big deal because, like, think of how long this mechanism has existed and think of how many times they've messed it up. Like, this is the only time I can think of that they've messed it up, and it's existed for a long time, and it was fixed very easily, and it's very simple. So I totally give them a pass on that one. I'm reminded of, like, you guys don't remember this, but macOS 7.5.4 or System 7.5.4. Sorry, it was not macOS 7.5.4. I blame the internet for that. That they had basically two versions of, like, that it reached Golden Master back in the days when that actually meant something because they would print floppy disks and stuff, and then they had to stop and say, oh no, actually, we made a mistake, and here's the new version. But some of the old version got out, so for a certain period of time, there were multiple official binaries of System 7.5.4 on floppy disks floating around. Or you couldn't be sure exactly which one you had because they all just said 7.5.4 and they didn't have build numbers visible to users at that time. So anyway, stuff like that happens. It's not a big deal. The Mac App Store certificate signing thing, I think that is emblematic of, like, well, this is supposed to be a major feature and you have the iOS App Store, and it's a type of thing that is really complicated and hard to get right and requires forethought and care. And, like, it's not so simple as, like, oops, well, we'll just wait, and another silent update will fix this. Lots of people were left in situations where their apps wouldn't launch and all that other stuff. And that, I think, shows a lack of investment in the Mac, of, like, not being prepared for that eventuality. Because if you can think of something like that happen on the iPhone, and then for the same period of time, the same percentage of iPhone users would tap icons on their phones and nothing would launch, that would be just a disaster of epic proportions. I mean, and in some degree, it's like, well, the iPhone sells more, that's why it gets more attention or whatever. But yeah, we all think there should be a little bit more care on the Mac. And the disk utility one, disk utility is the least of disk systems problems. I think it did need it did need a GUI refresh. This GUI refresh is not a great GUI refresh, but I don't think anyone would care that much if it wasn't for the two things that Marco mentioned. Removing features, which is like, I was using that. Like, you haven't replaced it with anything. There's no promise of being replaced with anything. The old thing worked. Why is it gone? With no explanation. So removing features is bad. And then having, I should put a link in the show notes, but someone linked to something, I think it was MJ Sai again, linking to the story that Casey was just talking about the typo, but just saying like, Super Duper leverages some of the same command line utilities and frameworks that are underneath disk utility. And Super Duper has a mode where it will clone your drive, and you can tell it erase the destination drive first and then clone onto it. And he was getting like out of disk space warnings, and it's because the system code that erases the volume would tell Super Duper, yep, totally just erase that volume for you. It's totally erased. Go ahead and fill it. And Super Duper would go to try to fill it and eventually fill the disk because the disk wasn't erased. Like the underlying disk utility functionality of please erase this volume for me would report success, but have actually failed. And that type of failure is like, forget about cosmetics, so there's like missing features and features that work worse now. Basic features like, please erase this volume for me. That's kind of untenable. So that's why I think this utility update is bad. Not because the GUI is weird and they kind of, the windows aren't resizable and it's hard to see the messages or whatever. Like, it did need a GUI refresh. Feel free to do that anytime you want. But when the underlying functionality is either removed or doesn't work right, that's a real bummer.
Well, yeah, like if this was not a utility that was very customer facing. Again, this was like a really technical utility that only geeks really ever used. If you don't have the resources, or if you're not willing to devote the resources to do it right, then just leave it be for another release, because no one is pressuring you to redesign something like that already works. And if the best you can do is to replace it with a version that doesn't work as well, then don't do that redesign. Like, why? It's like, just like with Discovery D, like, yeah, you redesign this whole thing, you rewrote this whole thing, but the new one works worse. And eventually they came around to the right decision, which was, okay, we'll go back to the old one. With disk utility, I feel like they should do the same thing. Is like, either fix the new one, which I think is probably a big job, and it seems to probably not have a lot of resources devoted to it. I'm guessing that was one of those drive-by updates, or just put the old one back because it was fine. It didn't not work. Like, it was fine. It just was a little bit ugly, but who cares? It's a utility.
You got to think that, so there's the GUI part of it, which, is not most of the application. And then there's the underlying frameworks and command line utilities. And the fact that some of those either disappeared or stopped working, those must have changed. It's not just that they put a bad GUI on top of it, in which case, fine, put back the old GUI. There must have been underlying changes to the parts of the system that deal with disks, all those frameworks, and, the command line utilities or whatever. So it might not be just as simple as put in the old version of the disk utility application. It's a, like many of the things Apple makes, it's a series of frameworks, and there's a GUI front end, and there's a command line front end, and it goes always down through the system. And I try to think out why they got rid of those features. Maybe they just were trying to reduce the surface area of bugs. I think they got rid of software RAID or something. And I don't think it's a bad idea to say, so few of our customers use this. Supporting it is really difficult. It should go away. It's not going to be supported from now on. It's disappointing to people, but if you can do that in a good way, and basically I would say give everyone a warning, tell them software RAID is going away, give them alternatives, instead of just let you wake up and you're like, oh, new version disk utility. Wait, where does that command go? It wasn't sort of communicated out in any way, or there wasn't 1 year where every time you select software RAID, it would tell you software RAID will be unsupported in the next version. You should stop, you know what I mean? There's good and bad transitions. But then having the thing that says that it erases disks fail to erase a disk, but report success, that's just bad. And I don't know what the fix for that is. I like to imagine, of course, that they're redoing this because they're ripping out all this stuff in anticipation of the new file system that's going to come in 2017. But who knows if that's even related. So anyway, they redid Activity Monitor a couple of years ago too. I think all those applications that sit in the utilities folder, they should get updates every 5 years or so. They should have complete GUI refreshes or whatever. But like Marco said, there's no rush. If you don't have time to do it this year, wait till next year. It's not like people are like, oh, I was going to upgrade to the new OS, but they didn't upgrade Activity Monitor this year. No one cares. That's fine.
Yeah, I would rather have just the old one that still works than a new one that doesn't.
Yeah, and to the credit for all the people who do the underlying file system stuff, like core storage and everything, and all the stuff that enables, like the new version of File Vault. I don't know how many years that was in gestation, but when it came, like, it worked. Like, the new version of File Vault, like, was, the old version was terrifying, and it's all sorts of bugs. It was crazy. And the new version sadly had the same name, but it's like everyone who tried it's like, you do it and it just works. Right, and they had to do so much plumbing changes to make that happen. Like, all of core storage and all that stuff. Like, that's a significant change, but they waited until it was basically ready. I mean, it's not like there weren't bugs, and not like they didn't fix them and everything, but like, it was clearly like production caliber when it was released, right? And even though they improved the next year and the next year and the next year after that, like, I think everyone was shocked by how much of a non-issue it was. Is your disk encrypted? Yeah, I checked the checkbox and entered some passwords. Now my disk is encrypted. I don't even notice. It doesn't affect my life. It's like magic. That's the way things should be. That's the way the new file system will be in 2017, right, guys?
Honestly, I'm a little scared because I question whether today's Apple, with what they're showing us by their actions here, can they deliver a really big, really important, stable, new generation of something that large? Like, can Apple deliver a new file system for the Mac today without massive bugs?
Well, they've been working on it for like 20 years now, right? It's got to be so good now.
But where are those people? What are they? In how many directions are those resources being pulled right now?
We don't know if there's any resources. We don't know if there's even a project. We know nothing.
That's true. But whatever this is, if there is a new file system here, Apple from 5 years ago might have been able to ship it and it might have worked. But I really, honestly, I'm worried about Apple today about whether they can do this kind of very large new project on a platform, on the Mac, on a platform that they don't really seem to be devoting substantial resources to anymore.
I think they're totally capable. It's just a question of making the call and when to pull the trigger. That's all it comes down to. Is it ready? The go, no to go decision. Is it ready this year or is it not ready this year? You just make the right call on that, and it's like the whole Mac is like disk utility. No one's in a big hurry. Like, if it's not ready, don't ship it. If it's ready, ship it. That's it. Because I totally believe the capabilities are all there. Even resource starved, even with people getting pulled off to work on the mystical car or whatever they're doing, all that does is push your dates back. That's all that should happen.
Well, except that what I think we see now that today's Apple would much rather hit a ship date than ship something perfect.
I think you're taking this way too far when it comes to the file system example, because the file system is one of the bases of the entire Mac pyramid. I mean, if you screw that up, that's a big damn deal. And I think that Apple is smart enough to realize that if they're really going to pull the trigger on a new file system, if this is really going to happen, kind of like what John was saying a minute ago, they're going to make sure that they are ready, and they are going to test the snot out of that. It's not the sort of thing that you can just say, why not? And fire from the hip. Pew, pew, pew. Let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens.
They did that with HFS Plus, though.
Oh, come on.
You guys don't remember that. Let me tell you a little bit about what that was like.
Please do. Gather around the fire, kids.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Let Grandpa tell you about the file system.
So there was there was MFS. We're not going to talk about that. There was HFS, which was fine for a while, and then Mac OS 8.1 I think came out, and that had a new file system. They're calling it HFS Plus. And if you were installing it onto an empty volume, you could format as HFS Plus and install your operating system, and you'd be in this brave new world, right? They also had a feature, this is my recollection, people can correct me if I'm wrong, I could be mixing up third-party stuff, but I'm pretty sure first party had a feature where you could say, I've got an HFS disk, and in those days, like, disks were tiny, and they were always full because they were tiny. You could say, I want to upgrade to macOS 8.1, and I would also like you to change my volume from HFS to HFS Plus in place. Change the format of the file system without deleting my data. Leave the data there, but convert the thing from HFS to HFS Plus.
That sounds like a bad idea.
That process, as you might imagine, because these were not days of like log structured file systems where it's like write only file systems. You can do this because you can do this with BTRFS and lots of other things because of the way they're laid out in a reasonably safe way. But this was like a literal, like, in place. If you unplug your computer in the middle of this, or if anything goes wrong, kiss your stuff goodbye. right? And it was terrifying. And we didn't have any place we couldn't do online backups because for me anyway, and for most people, there was no online, right? And we didn't have enough hard disk space to actually make a real, like, no one had backups because there was no way to back up. Like, I had one hard drive, or I had multiple hard drives, but they were all filled with stuff. Like, where, and so...
Yeah, it spun uphill both ways.
Right, and so what was your choice? Like, if you wanted HFS Plus, then who didn't, right? Wow, 255 character file names and all, Anyway, most of the good stuff in HFS Plus wasn't even exposed. But the bottom line is you could at least have a block size that made it so, a text file with 1 byte in it didn't take up this then obscene amount of space, because that was the problem with HFS, is that as the volumes got bigger, the block size had to grow proportionally. And so no matter how small you made your file, your minimum file size kept going up and up to a size that we wouldn't care about today. I think it was like, we were all upset because it was like 4K for, a single character file, like, or more than 4K, and that was too big. Anyway, the benefits weren't even all that great, and the risks were tremendous. And if you wanted to upgrade, you had to either erase your disk, in which case you needed to have a backup, or do this in-place backup. And it was not... It was touch and go there for a year or two. And, we probably didn't hear as much about it because people weren't online as much back then and talking to each other about all the problems that are inherent in that. But it was really scary. These days, what I was going to say to Casey's thing of like, the file system, they're going to make sure it's super safe. Remember, HFS Plus runs on the phone too. So you're pretty much guaranteed that if they're replacing it with anything, it's going to, that's bet the company kind of stuff. There's no way in hell they would replace HFS Plus with anything else on the phone if they weren't damn sure that it fulfilled the requirements of it. So I have some faith that we will not see a file system until that happens. Do I have faith that that means the file system will be out in 2017? I don't know. But just take your time, get it right. We waited this long, whatever.
Our second sponsor this week is Igloo. Go to igloosoftware.com/ATP for the intranet you will actually like. Now, if you've worked in a corporate environment, Casey, John, you know how painful intranets can be and usually are. The content is stale, the interface is ugly, you can't usually do much of it on your phone or have any access at all. Igloo is an intranet that you will actually like, designed by people who have modern sensibilities and who recognize that mobile exists and there are different screen sizes and you need to do things in browsers a lot of times. And you know what? Decent, easy to use design might actually be something you should consider for your intranet. All these things that seem obvious to, people like us who live in the real world, but for some reason intranets usually lack these things. Igloo actually pays attention to what people want and what is good in the universe, and they implement it on their intranets that for you, for your benefit, for your company. This is an easy-to-use collaboration tool. They're going to help you do your best work. You can share files and updates with your team. You can coordinate calendars. You can manage department projects and more. Whether you're a large enterprise stuck using SharePoint or a fast-growing business overwhelmed by file sharing and calendar apps, that sound is called the SharePoint sigh. That's they can run with that. That is the SharePoint sigh. But if you use Igloo, you will not have the SharePoint sigh. You will just rejoice in everything just working and being nice, which is something that internet users have never had before. So check it out today. Go to igloosoftware.com/ATP for a really, really great, secure, nice, easy to use corporate intranet. And if you have 10 or fewer people, it's free forever. Bigger teams, you still get a free trial. So check it out today at igloosoftware.com/ATP. Start your free trial. Thanks a lot to Igloo for sponsoring our show.
So, John, since you're already a little bit fired up, tell me how it is you kind of just have disc-free Blu-rays. How is that even possible?
We're going to do that topic next. All right. Before we jump to that, though, the chat room wants us to say this, and it's another story for the youngins, although you guys have probably heard it, and I'll do it quickly.
Back to the fire.
Yeah, the other fun thing about the HFS to HFS Plus conversion, I don't know if this is still true, probably not, but I don't remember. There was some recent articles, it came up again on the modern internet a couple years ago, so maybe you could find those blog posts. But anyway, when it converted your disk, it would do this clever thing where it would, if this HFS Plus disk was read by a system that predates HFS Plus, rather than saying this disk is unreadable, would you like to initialize, as in I have no idea what the hell this disk is, the disk would appear to older disks as an HFS disk that had this little miniature HFS disk volume entry in it, in the place where in the place where a pre-HFS Plus system would look for it. And the only thing on that disk was a little tiny README file that explained what the hell HFS Plus is and where all your crap went. And it was just the ideal, cute little Mac thing where instead of just, telling you your thing is initialized and telling your disk is unreadable and scaring people and tricking them into like accidentally hitting the erase button because they don't know what else to do, your disk would mount and you'd be like, where the hell's all my stuff? And you would see this one little text file, this one little readme file sitting there. And what else can you do there? But like, I guess I'll read this file. Maybe it'll tell me, because I forget what it was called. It was like, it was something about like, where did my files go? Or please read me or whatever. Like it was trying to help you say, look here, and we'll tell you what the heck's going on. And it would say, oh, this disk has been formatted with HFS+, which is a new format, and you're booted into an old system, and blah, 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 blah. That was like, that's the good stuff. That's the good Apple Mac way. Kind of whimsical, kind of fun, technically super clever. Because they control everything from top to bottom, they can do this. They can say, we're going to define a new volume format, but we're going to leave a spot for this little funny little wrapper. And I don't remember if when the wrapper went away or if it's still there. It's probably gone now. But I always like that, and that is, I think, the example of Apple at its best.
So tell me, John, how do you handle Blu-rays these days?
Oh, this topic. I try to handle them not at all. So we've talked about Blu-rays a little bit, as in like, where did you get this movie? Do you, did you get it on iTunes? How do you watch movies? All our different Plex things, streaming things from Netflix, from HBO Go. All sorts of ways that we watch television and movies these days. And I would always chime in at a certain point to say, oh, I buy the movies that I care about on Blu-ray. Because despite the fact that Blu-ray is awful, everybody knows Blu-ray is awful, for all the reasons that anyone who's ever used a Blu-ray knows. They take a million years to load. You're waiting for the menus to load. They show you previews that sometimes you can't skip. You just want to watch the movie. There's a spinning disc in there that probably makes noise, or more noise than a digital file anyway. You have to get the disc out of its case. You got to stick it into a little thing. Like it's all...
Do they still run Java?
Yeah, very often. They will run Java or try to download something, or you have compatibility problems. My favorite one is, like, I have lots of fancy equipment that can, in theory, play Blu-rays, and every once in a while, one of them will be like, get me on a menu screen where it won't let me select the play button, or where it will freeze on a menu screen. And it's just like, and this is after you've sat through previews or tried to skip them or figure out which button you have to hit to get past the previews. Can I advance track? Can I hit top menu? Can I hit pop-up menu? And you get through that, and then the menu freezes and you can't hit play.
I love Blu-rays. Like, it's like, it's like this committee looked at the DVD format, and they were like, you know what this needs? More prohibited user operations, software updates, and Java.
Yeah, and software, like running software. So it's an incredibly misguided, customer hostile format. And really, like, you just want to watch the movie, right? That's all you want. You want the movie to start playing now, right? So why do I keep buying Blu-rays? I keep buying them because it continues to be the highest quality version of a movie that you can get. And not all movies I care about that. I get a lot of movies, especially like kids movies on iTunes or whatever, like, they're fine. But for the movies I really care about, I want the highest quality version that I can buy, or that a regular consumer can buy. And Blu-ray is it. Blu-ray discs are huge. You can get a Blu-ray movie that's like tens of gigabytes. Yes, they're still compressed. It's not like it's uncompressed, but they're compressed at a higher bit rate with better algorithms. And like, they are, they have, some of them have uncompressed audio on them, or, multiple higher resolution audio tracks, and all sorts of good things about it. So it is the best copy of a movie you can get. So all the movies I care about, I get on Blu-ray. All the movies that I really, really, appreciate. And I have a setup that can play them correctly on my fancy TV, and everything's good. Except, of course, I hate Blu-ray. So what I'm always looking for, not like really actively, but just like be on the lookout for this, is the point where I can take my Blu-rays and get the bits off of them and put them onto a hard drive somewhere, and then watch them from that hard drive. Now all the menus are gone. Like, I'm just taking the movie. All the stupid menus, all the FBI warnings, all the Java applets, all the previews, all that is gone.
Wait, are you confessing to a felony?
I don't know. I just want the bits off of the disc. And then I want to be able to play those bits and have it be exactly the same as it would be if I put the Blu-ray into the drive, except without all the bad parts. And I have all these boxes connected to my television, and I've got my big Synology down there that's got a lot of room on it. And like I said, I've not been actively seeking this out, but I figured at a certain point, just from my normal churn of the various boxes that are attached to my TV, I will probably eventually get to the point where this is the thing that can happen. And I thought I might have been at that point because, as we've discussed on past shows, I've been running Plex on my new Apple TV, and I finally got my Plex library kind of in order. Lots of things have Plex clients. My TiVo has a Plex client. My television can read things directly off the Synology, off the server that it runs. My Apple TV box can do it. Like, I have so many different choices. I can run the server off my computer, which, by the way, I don't know if it occurs to people to do this, and maybe it's not recommended, but if you have a NAS, you can mount your NAS on your Mac and then run Plex on your Mac with the NAS mounted where all your, like, video is.
That's exactly what I do.
Right. But you can also have, like, Synology has a Plex server on it. So I have a Plex server on my NAS, and I have another Plex server on my Mac, both of which are pointing to the exact same video files. And they more or less stay in sync with each other. Like, they don't fight each other and everything. And so why would you do that? Why would you choose between them? Well, I don't like to have the Mac on all the time, but if there's something that needs some kind of heavy transcoding to be able to play at all, the Mac can handle it, and the Synology might not be able to. And really, I don't know, I'm just playing with things. But anyway, so that's the situation I'm in, and I figured, I think I'm at the point where I can do this now. So I bought myself like a $50, Blu-ray drive. That's how cheap they are these days for your computer. Mm-hmm. Just like a little thing you put a little Blu-ray that hooks up to USB.
Yep, bag of hurt. Right.
Yep, and then get make MKV or some other program that you're going to ask to. People might say I'm going to rip my Blu-rays, but I'm not re-encoding them. I am not running them through compression algorithms. I just want the bits off the disk exactly as they are, not changed in any possible way. Right?
Yeah, because isn't that exactly what Make MKV does?
Yeah, I think people have workflows where like it goes through this whole big process and actually re-rip. We can talk to Don Melton about what his workflow is. He's always re-encoding all of his movies, and I'm like, so do you have the original uncompressed thing somewhere? And that's your input, or do you feed discs in forever? I don't know what it does, but anyway, yeah, Make MKV will let you select which tracks you want off the thing, and it will just pull them off exactly as they are, bit for bit, which is exactly what I want. Not for all my movies. Again, like I have most of the things like that I don't care that much about. I'll buy on iTunes or I'll watch on Netflix, so I don't have to store them at all. But for the the handful of like my very, very favorite movies, right? And I did this. Seemed to go okay. Like I just did it for like 2 or 3 experimental movies off of Blu-ray, and again they're huge, like 20 or 30 gigabytes. Like you're gonna run a disk space real fast if you take your movie library of 300 movies and just do the math. You will see that it will take up a lot of room. But I was just doing a couple of them. And I thought it was home free because I'm like, great, got the bits off the disk. I've got a million places I can put these bits that I can play them. I can put them on Plex and have it served from my Mac. I put them on Plex and have them served from my Synology. I can put them on my Synology, have it served from DLNA server. On my television, I can play them from my PlayStation 3. I could play them from my PlayStation 4 if it was hooked up to my television, but it's not. I could play them from my Apple TV. I can play them from the television itself. Like, I probably can play them from the Wii U if I wanted to. Who knows what they have out? I have so many options. So I'm like, surely one of these will work to do what I want. And they almost do. They're really close. But I had forgotten about 2 things. One, I didn't really forget about this, but I figured something I had would have it work. I'd forgotten about 24 frames per second cadence. Most movies that we know of that people like these days are shot at 24 frames per second for a variety of historical reasons. And most televisions, for a different variety of historical reasons, most flat screen televisions show a new frame at some multiple that 24 does not go into evenly. So they may be, they're not 60 hertz these days, but like,
aren't there 120 ones?
Yeah. There's 120 and 240 and stuff like that, right? So if you have one of those televisions and you can get 24 into it evenly, you're fine. But if you're like me and you have a plasma television that doesn't display at if you have a device that doesn't output an even multiple of 24, that's usually what it is. It's not so much the television set. So the best example is the Apple TV, which I believe outputs at 60 hertz, which is what all our Macs output at, like 60 refreshes of your screen each second, right? And if you've got 24 frames of video and you're trying to put it out over a connection that's going to show 60 frames every second, the math doesn't work out for you there. So you have to, because you can't show, like, say you have frame number 1, frame number 2, frame number 3. What they end up doing is they show frame number 1 3 times. They show frame number 2 2 times. They show frame number 3 3 times, and it's like 3 2 3 2 3 2 3 2. And that's not what you want because you're showing the frames an uneven number of times. It's supposed to be one frame for 1/24th of a second, then the next frame for 1/24th of a second. Every frame should be shown for exactly the same amount of time. But if you're sending 60 updates a second, you just can't do that with 24 frames per second, right? And it doesn't matter what your television does if the output device is like that. Now, very clever modern televisions have a thing where they will do 3-to-2 cadence detection. Well, they will figure out, seems like this device is sending me like one frame 3 times that never changes, and the next frame it sends me 2 times, and that one is the same for the 2 things, and then it sends me the next frame 3 times, and the next one 2. Oh, I see what's going on there. And it fixes it for you. It re-expands the frame rate and it displays them because it has a refresh rate that's a multiple of 24, and you're fine. And then when you actually look at it on the television, it shows you each frame for exactly the same amount of time, and every frame comes on for 1/24th of a second.
That's awesome. I didn't know the TVs were that smart.
Yeah, mine doesn't do that because it's, A, not that smart, and B, like that process, as you can imagine, is kind of like detecting that and handling it correctly is potentially problematic. So what you really want is for the device that you're playing the movie on to say, look, I'm going to send it at not at 24 frames per second, but at 24 frame per second cadence. So I'm going to send you some multiple of 24, right? Whether I can't do the math in my head, but is 96 a multiple, or 120 or 240 or whatever?
Yes.
Anyway, I'm going to send you some multiple of 24, and then you, television, realize that I'm sending to you at this frame rate, and television decide to update exactly at this thing. So if I send you 96 hertz, television, please display 96 hertz. And then everyone's fine. And so, like, frame for number 1 is shown, 3 or 4 times. And all the frames, that's when they say it's 24 frames per second. They don't mean that your television is updating 24 times a second. That would look terrible for most television technologies. All they mean is that the cadence is correct. That the first frame is shown for 1/24th of a second exactly, and the second frame is shown for 1/24th of a second exactly. That's what you want to happen. And when I put a Blu-ray player in my PlayStation 3, it does exactly that. It sends it out at 24 frames per second cadence. My television realizes that the PlayStation wants to talk to it that way. They negotiate over HDMI. My television changes to be at exactly a 24 frame per second cadence. That is the only way you see a Blu-ray the way it's supposed to look without what they call judder. Judder is what they call it when you see the 3-2-3-2-3-2 type thing. Especially when they have like a pan or some quick motion where it seems herky-jerky because it is jerky, because it's not smooth motion. They're not showing each frame for 1/24th of a second. I thought, surely I have some box that can take this 24 frame per second Blu-ray and show it like that. But it turns out, for the most part, I don't. The Apple TV won't do it because the Apple TV has a fixed refresh rate, and for whatever reason, my television does not detect that it's getting 3.2, and it can't reverse the process. I don't think there's anything I can do on my Apple TV to convince it to output at 96 or 48 or something like that. The last forum entry I saw from some Apple person answering, they basically said applications on the Apple TV have no power to affect what's going out over the HDMI cable, like the refresh rate. They can't change that. It's fixed and it's part of the OS. It's possible a future OS update could change to either let applications control that or let users control it with some setting or something, but right now it doesn't. And how do I know that my television isn't correctly detecting the 3.2 cadence and fixing it for me? You can kind of tell by looking at like scenes in movies and pans or whatever, but there's a much easier way to tell. There's a lot of little test movies that you can download that show, for example, a white box marching across the screen. And for the first frame, the white box is on the left. And for the next frame, the white boxes move 1 unit over. And for the next frame, so you see 24 boxes which light up one after the other. Each frame, one of the boxes is lit up. All you do is take your fancy Marco Arment expensive camera and figure out how to change the shutter speed to exactly 1 second. You play that movie on your television, you take a picture of your television with an exposure time of 1 second, then you look at the picture. If your television is doing the right thing, you should see 24 grayish boxes that look exactly the same brightness, because every single one of those squares was on screen for exactly 1/24th of a second, and 1/24th of a second is the same exposure on your camera sensor. So that's what you should see. If it's doing it wrong, what you will see is bright square, dim square, bright square, dim square, bright square, dim square. The bright ones were the ones that were shown for 3 frames, and the dim ones are the ones that were shown from 2 frames. So just to be double extra sure, I experimentally determined that, yes, no combination of Apple TV plus Plex
of course you did.
will produce anything except for the one I had like a clock dial too, which also made the hands go around a clock in 20, well, not a clock, but like a thing in 24 increments, and you would see bright hand, dark hand, bright hand, dark hand. It was such a pain in the ass to figure out how to get my camera to do an exposure of 1 second because I don't know any of like the terminology in camera land. I was like, shutter speed, exposure, like once, and the correct setting, I don't even remember what the hell it was called, but the correct setting said 1 and then like the inch sign, like a quote, 1 inch, 2 inch. I'm like, that's seconds? That's not, I mean, I guess minutes is a single prime and seconds is the...
Well, because normally it's showing you a fraction of a second in most other cases. So it'll say like it might just say like 500, which is 1/500th of a second. So they do that little like quote thing. Just I think it is like degree, minute, seconds kind of reference there. But,
yeah.
But I think it's more just to be very different from what it was showing before. So you don't have like 5 and think it's 1/5 of a second.
Yeah, very very confusing. People don't know photography, but anyway. Apple TV, no go, which is a shame because that's what I wanted to do. Apple TV has no fan. It's got Plex on it. I could put my Blu, that's where I put my Blu-rays right into Plex. Plex will play them just fine. I can, it'll play the movie, but won't get the right cadence.
Did your family see you doing this test?
No, they don't. They weren't around at this time, or maybe they were asleep. It's a silent test. And so I asked about it on Twitter. I got some suggestions like, oh, you should try it on your TiVo. I'd forgotten that my TiVo even had a Plex client, but guess what? TiVo has a Plex client.
Is it HD? Is it slow?
It's slow, but it will output 24 hertz. And it will negotiate with my television and convince my television to display. I mean, it says 24 hertz, but again, it's not really 24. It will output at 24 frames per second cadence. But everything else about it is awful. I think it's only 720p, so I think it's like reconverting the video. At the very least, the menus appear to be 720p, and it downmixes all the audio to it's like stereo. Like it doesn't do multi-channel at all. I think the closest I got was I had managed to, I forget which one it was that did this. I think I had managed through like the PlayStation 3, which is my good Blu-ray player that does the correct cadence. I think I got everything except for it wouldn't do uncompressed linear PCM audio, which the Kill Bill Blu-ray has on it. It would only do the AC3 one. And I wasn't entirely convinced that it had gotten the cadence right either. I don't remember if I redid the test on that. But bottom line is none of the devices I had fulfilled this requirement. And I don't really blame them because this is not a mainstream use. Nobody cares about this. They just want, like, if I just rip these movies and just play them, like, regular people can't tell that the cadence is wrong. They don't care that they've been recompressed. Nobody can hear the difference between compressed and uncompressed audio. I certainly can't on my crappy speakers. But it's the principle of the matter, as you can imagine. And I really do think that I would notice the cadence in the same way you can notice, like, the soap opera effect or whatever. I really do want the frame rate to be right. And the whole point of this experiment is, if I can't get it all the way, then like I'll just go back to watching, because I do have compressed rips of all these things. It's not like I can't see the movie, and I can put in the Blu-ray when I really care about it, right? But I'm so close. So many devices are capable of doing everything. They just haven't got the last little bit, which is please pass through the audio in whatever format it is directly to my receiver, which can understand all these formats and can play all of them. Please don't try to downmix. Please don't refuse to use linear PCM and only send AC3. Please don't do anything like that. Please don't change the video. Please don't try to change to 720p. And get the display cadence right between the television, which totally supports this if you talk to it in a reasonable way. Talk to the television the right way. And I got a lot of suggestions for alternatives that will do this. Obviously, if I was to get a home theater PC, I can do it. Like lots of Mac and PC solutions do this. Obviously, I'm not going to do that, even a fanless one. I'm not going to build myself a home theater PC. I'm not signing up for that.
You won't even build yourself a gaming PC, even though you really probably should. You won't even do that, so there's no way you're building an HT PC.
Firewatch is pretty smooth on the 5K iMac, let me tell you. It's pretty nice. Not that that's a very demanding game, but yeah, I'm not signing up to that. Yeah, I know I could do that. I definitely could. A lot of people suggested Raspberry Pi, which I actually kind of consider, because I'm like, you know what, that seems simpler than a home theater PC.
Can they do that? Yeah, like, are they powerful enough to do that kind of role? Where...
Yeah, people who are using it for that say it might be borderline, but it is. I was like, is there something I can buy? Like, can I buy a packaged thing that is really a Raspberry Pi all packaged together already? Like, I don't want to have to do any of the crap. Is there like a Raspberry Pi guts in a box that I can buy? And mostly like, no, you kind of got to do a little bit of stuff yourself. So it's like, nah, not quite for me. There's the Android Shield, the NVIDIA Shield TV thing, which runs Android TV, that very recently, and Fire TV both now I believe have options to mess with the refresh rate, so you can force it to output in the right format. But there were some questions about whether they supported the the pass through of the audio and everything. And the NVIDIA Shield is like $200. I mean, it's a gaming thing. It's not just for a television box. And it does have a fan, although people assure me that the fan basically never turns on or is inaudible or whatever.
You would find when it turns on.
It's big. It's like, I mean, it's practically like a little miniature game console. So that, I think, that's the closest thing I came to considering buying. But I don't want to have, I think I'm almost out of inputs, and I don't want to blow one more input on something like this and have one more remote and one more controller and thing or whatever. So right now, I'm in holding pattern on this. I haven't ripped any more of my Blu-rays because it does take a little while to do that. I think I'm pinning my hopes basically on the Apple TV because I feel like they're really close to getting it right, and people have complained to Apple about not supporting this. I think we even talked about it. Like, the reason they might not do it is, well, if you change to a 24 frame per second cadence, the GUI looks gross, like on the actual device when you're going through the menus. And they don't want to change it when you hit play because it's not a good experience to have that like flicker HDMI refresh rate changed thingy.
I can see their solution being that they would just offer 120. And then, and they would say, I'm sending you 120 for everything. And then the whole UI would run at 120.
Well, that's what I mean. But 24 frames per second cadence doesn't mean 24. It just means like that you're at that cadence. But I don't know if the portions of the GUI system, like when you're running the Mac part of it, I don't know if the Mac operating system can operate at that kind of refresh rate. Like, I understand they could do it for video output, like negotiating over HDMI and everything, but for the GUI part of it, does the Mac do anything at like 240 frames per second or 120? Well, ATP Tips just says it can. I guess that we've never encountered it because obviously every LCD is 60 hertz, right? So it doesn't come up. It's not like the old CRT days where you had a fancy CRT, you could refresh at 120 hertz and everything would be so smooth and awesome and a little bit dim because it's kind of flickery. But
well, the iPad Pro has dynamic refresh rate, and I think so. And it samples like the digitizer at 60, and I mean at I think 120, and the pencil I think at 240. So it can sample things faster.
But it's only displaying 60, yeah.
Yeah, I think the UI is, even on the iPad Pro, even in those modes, I think the UI is still fixed to 60. But I'm sure they could, if they wanted to, I'm sure they could, they could push for that for something like the Apple TV, where like, the Apple TV is kind of special because it's the only device that runs iOS that doesn't need to be concerned at all about power efficiency.
Yeah.
So if something that like just needs a higher wattage GPU or a more power draw, like on the Apple TV, you can do that with it, within obviously the thermal bounds of the enclosure, but it's you have much more headroom there than you do in something like an iPad or an iPhone where power efficiency is more important to conserve.
I'm a little bit afraid they might not consider it an issue because from the other people who are like me trying to do similar things with Apple TV boxes, a lot of them ran the experiment with the camera exposure and they saw evenly colored boxes across their screen, which means these are all people with LCDs television, which means their modern LCDs are figuring out the 3.2 coming off of the I assume 60 hertz coming out of the Apple TV, and they're fixing it, right? And so if that's the case, maybe that's Apple's solution. It's like, it's just always going to be 60 hertz house and you have to deal with it. But if there's any hope, it's going to be the thing connected to a TV. Like, its whole point is to show television and movies. And movies are all 24 frames per second, except for like The Hobbit and stuff and all the high frame rate stuff, right?
Which everybody hated, right?
I didn't hate it. Like it looked a little bit weird, but I would be pretty much on board if everyone wanted to make their movies like that. They just got to figure out how to make movies like that in the right way. It's like HD. Like, all of a sudden, all your sets look really crappy in HD because the sets were made for standard def, and now you realize it's like a cardboard box and a fake television in the background. So I did not hate high frame rate, but I think those examples of high frame rate did not do the format any justice. I feel like it could be done well, but anyway, that's like for the movies I love, and so many of the movies that I have, they're all 24. So I want some way to display them in that way. And so I guess, like the file system, I will just be patiently waiting. At a certain point, I will probably just give up and buy, like, the NVIDIA Shield or something, some box that can do that. I don't think it'll ever do a home theater PC, because if I wanted to do that, I would have done that long ago. Like, I could have done that ages ago. I was just so close to getting what I want. You just need a little bit more. And for those clients out there that are like the TiVo one that you're down mixing everything to stereo, it's like, why even bother? Like, I know most people don't have surround. Fine, you can have that be the default. Like, because it takes more work to down mix. Like, just pass it through. Like, have an option to say, hey, if they're sending me multi-channel audio, do you want me to just pass that through because you have a receiver? Check this checkbox. It's easier to pass it through than it is to down mix it. So there's some silliness going on in the TV box market as always. But anyway, I was impressed. I've still remained impressed with Plex and Apple TV combination for television shows and other things that don't have this frame rate issue. But I still can't quite get rid of my Blu-rays and my relatively noisy Blu-ray player quite yet.
If there's anything I've learned from listening to you talk about this, John, and Marco talking about headphones constantly, it's that I am so friggin' glad that I don't have the crazy discerning eyes/ears that you guys have. Because I have never noticed this jankiness that you're discussing. I love my $20 crappy Bluetooth headphones that I use every day that I've talked about ad nauseum on this show. I mean, not to say I don't appreciate a good set of headphones, and not to say I'm sure that I wouldn't appreciate a perfectly 24 frame per second movie as shown on a TV that's very, very nice like yours is, but this stuff just doesn't bother me, and oh man, I'm so thankful for that.
Do you notice the soap opera effect?
I don't even know what that is. I've heard of it, but I don't even know what it is.
Just don't even learn about it.
No. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
I think everybody can notice that once they become aware of it, because I feel like that's
the problem. It's like the FedEx arrow. Like everyone can see it, but before you have seen it, your mind isn't ruined.
Exactly.
Or you don't know what it is that you're seeing. Like there could be something off about it, but it looks a little bit. I mean, even for me, the first time I saw it, when I got my first television that supported that feature, I was like, ugh, what the hell? I'm like, and then I remembered like half a second, like, oh, it must come like that out of the box. And I but if I hadn't read about it beforehand, I would have thought, this new TV is weird. Maybe, and people just get used to it. Casey, I feel like making you go over your television right now and adjusting it to make sure that it is showing the full 1080 picture instead of chopping off the sides.
Oh, it's not. And it drives me berserk because occasionally on the Apple TV, I can tell where it's getting clipped. And I keep telling the TV, no, show me everything pixel for pixel. And then it keeps forgetting every time I turn it off that I've told it that.
Keeps forgetting?
No, Casey, this is you finally found a way to get John to drive to your house.
That's true. Yeah. So you tell me, John, how to get I think it's a Toshiba TV, to remember that I want full frame and not chop off the edges.
I understand why it wouldn't. Well, the only trick I know that if it's not remembering, can you name your input PC? Can you rename your inputs?
It is, yes, and it is named PC.
I don't know. Maybe you have like a bum battery somewhere and there's not keeping the... Like, how does it forget? Like, what's the point of that feature? Who's going to change it every time they turn on the television?
Well, no. So to be clear, what I'm doing is I'm hitting, I think it's pic size or picture size on the remote, and it will let me adjust. It will let me adjust, through several different options. I don't even remember what they are right now, but one of them is like full res or dot for dot. I forget exactly what it's called, but it will let me adjust to that. However, every time I turn the TV off and then turn the TV back on, it goes back to whatever the default mode is.
You got to Google for like your television model manual PDF, or like there's always some like hidden service menu where you type in some numeric code and some crazy menu comes up on the screen. There may be a way to do it, and if you can't, you should just get rid of that television, because honestly, that's obscene. Or you just live with it, or just resign yourself to A, missing a whole bunch of the picture, and B, having the rest of the picture stretched out.
Yep.
That's gross. And to the soap opera effect, if you have any settings on the television...
I don't want to know.
Oh, I'm going to tell you now.
Just
listen. If you don't notice, you don't notice. But like,
our final sponsor this week is Casper. Go to casper.com/ATP and use code ATP. Terms and conditions do apply to get $50 towards any mattress purchase. Casper is an online retailer of premium mattresses for a fraction of the price. The mattress industry has inherently forced customers into paying notoriously high markups. Casper is revolutionizing it by cutting the cost of dealing with resellers and showrooms and passing that savings directly on to the consumer. Casper mattresses provide resilience and long-lasting supportive comfort with a one-of-a-kind hybrid mattress that combines premium latex foam with memory foam. It's an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. Now, the latex foam and memory foam come together for better nights and brighter days with just the right sink and just the right bounce. Now, it sounds crazy to buy a mattress from the internet. We all know that. Now, of course, lying on one in a store for 2 seconds and then deciding I'm going to sleep on this for 8 hours a night for the rest, the next 10 years, that is pretty crazy too. Casper recognizes that really the best way to try out a mattress is to actually sleep on it for a while in your house, like for real. And so what they have really easy shipping. They ship it to you in a really compact box. So they kind of like vacuum pack it in there, and then it expands once you open it up. So shipping it to you is not a problem. Getting it into your house, getting it up stairwells, not a problem. If you live like in a big walk-up apartment and you have some weird stairwell to get around, the Casper will probably work for you where other mattresses might not. So it's no problem to get it to you, and then you get to try it out for 100 nights, risk-free. So you buy it from them, and you just sleep on it for up to 100 nights. And if you don't like it after that, you can return it for free. They will arrange for it. You don't even have to worry about how the heck do I ship this mattress back to them. They arrange it for you. They arrange a pickup for you. And it's all risk-free for 100 nights. So you can try out a mattress for 3 months and then decide whether it's worth it for you, which is better than anything you could ever get by going to a mattress store. Check it out today. These mattresses are made in America. Once again, combination of latex foam and memory foam for just the right sink, just the right bounce. And the best thing about this, the value is incredible. Only $500 for a twin-size mattress, going up to only $950 for a king, and all the sizes in between, of course. You try to find a good king mattress for $950, that's incredible. Usually you're paying at least double that for a mattress of this quality. So check it out today. Get $50 towards any mattress purchase by visiting casper.com/ATP and using code ATP. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you very much to Casper for sponsoring our show once again.
Also, check out their pillows. Very nice.
Yep.
Casey, on your television.
Oh, God.
If there are any settings.
So I love how, a long time ago, in I think 2003-ish, I had one of the very first DVD burners, and I stupidly picked the wrong side of a format war, and I got DVD+R instead of DVD-R, but before they were universal, doesn't matter. Anyway, at the time, the DVDs only held single layer, so they were only 4.7 gigs, and most movie DVDs at the time were dual layer, 8.5 gigs. So I had to, at that time, in order to pirate movies, which was the only reason you would need a DVD burner in 2002 or 2003, to back up my movies, I had to transcode it and I had to basically break apart the DVD structure, transcode the video to fit on the single layer discs from the commercial double layer discs. And that's the time in my life when I really discovered just how incredibly messy and complicated video is. Things like all these different frame rates, whether it was interlaced. Interlacing is the worst thing in the universe. And then you have all the, if the aspect ratio was wrong, and then you have audio sync issues possibly, and the tools, there was no handbrake at the time. The tools were 6 different tools. This one would demux the file, this one would remux the file, this one would transcode, and you had to. It was a huge mess. And I remember thinking, in just a few years, video will be simple. That was 13 years ago, and it sounds like video still isn't simple. It just the complications now are a little bit different. You still have some of the same ones. We solved some of the old ones. We introduced new ones as time went on. And then added Java and software updates. I mean, just this whole world, it just seems like it is so unnecessarily complex, but yet just never gets simplified.
We're on the right track with digital downloads and everything. It's just that it's like the last mile. The last mile equivalent is all right. So we all agree on a set of formats that are reasonable. Interlacing is gone. Audio sync shouldn't be an issue anymore because you get the package of files. We have ways to distribute reasonably sized digital files that look really good that have multi-channel audio. Even the pirating formats are all pretty nice now. There's a lot of uniformity. I mean, the magic of MKV and all that other stuff, right? But it's the last mile. It's okay, how do I take these digital bits, which are nice and uniform, and I can play almost anywhere? How do I show them on my television and listen to them through my television speakers or whatever speakers I have hooked up to my television in a way that doesn't subtly change or some would say ruin the content? Because the video file has a certain frame rate, and if you don't show it at some multiple of that frame rate, it's going to look weird. And if you have multi-channel audio and you downmix it all to stereo, it's going to be weird. Or if you just drop the back channels and there's a piece of dialogue or a sound effect that only happens in the back channels, it's going to be weird. And that's before you even get into how many times is compressed and how many times is it recompressed. Recompressing a double layer DVD down to single layer, that's gross, because MPEG-2 looked gross to begin with, and now you're just making it worse. So I would never bother with that.
It was 2003.
No, yeah, it's not good though. You got to play the pure MPEG-2 because that's as good as it's going to get.
Yeah, but back then, like, you were lucky if you had like a 10 gig hard drive.
Yeah.
Oh no, I guess by that time we had like 60, but still, like, that was still not a lot when you have 8 gig DVDs and you have a 60 gig hard drive.
Yeah. And the final part of the final mile was what I was just telling Casey, which is televisions, for a variety of good and bad reasons, try to do stuff with the picture to make it look quote unquote better or more correct or whatever. And a lot of the things they do to the picture make it look crazy. Like, for example, the high refresh rate LCDs that refresh at 240 hertz decide, you know what? We're refreshing at 240 hertz. If I'm showing a 24 frame per second movie, what the hell is the point of me showing frame number 1 10 times? Can't we do something clever and basically say, instead of showing frame number 1 10 times and then frame number 2 10 times, we know what frame number 1 and frame number 2 are going to be like. Can we show 20 pictures where frame number 1 slowly morphs into frame number 2?
All right, thanks. So, that's our 3 sponsors this week.
Don't try to. I'm just going to continue into the after show, so it's your choice.
Oh.
Audible.com, Igloo, and Casper, and we will see you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
So anyway, that effect where it takes 10 of frame number 1 and 10 of frame number 2 and tries to make 20 frames, each of which starts at 1 and ends at 2, but each one has a little thing in between. That's like called by a million different names by a million different manufacturers. Motion smoothing, picture interpolation, magic shadow, magic.
I totally blanked. What? Try that one more time, because I don't think I understand it all.
All right, so you've got.
I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
Casey just hung up the call.
Did I hang up everything? Sorry.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I initiated tonight, didn't I?
I couldn't tell what hung up on where, because I'm like, well, if he had hung up, he would have gone away. But then why is Marco gone too?
Yeah, sorry. I forgot that I kicked off the call today. That's even more and less comedic than I intended.
This new tick that you have of hanging up on podcasts, this needs to stop. We need to have sit down, Casey. We need to have a talk to you about hanging up on podcasts. You can do it once, and it might be funny. But if it becomes a thing, now we have an issue. And now we have to talk about how you're hanging up on podcasts.
Now we need an intervention.
Is affecting other people, mostly me.
Oh, goodness.
Anyway, I hope you do understand the motion smoothing thing. And here's the thing about it. If you don't notice it, turn it off on your television. Never think about it again. Of course, Casey's television will probably just turn it back on every time you turn the television back on. But if you don't notice when it's on, you also won't notice when it's off, and it will make everyone feel better. So just turn it off. I think if you watch your television with it off for a long time and then you turn it back on, you will notice. You'll be like, what the hell is this? It will look different and weird to you. Even things like sports will look different and weird. If your television has any features about like super brightness, enhancer, magical, sparkly, make better, just turn all of those off. If you don't know what they are, just turn them off. Off, off, off. Not low, not medium, like how much noise reduction do I want? Off, 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 off. And then you turn everything off. And if you don't like how your television looks with everything off, you probably have a crappy TV. Maybe consider turning one or two things back on to make your crappy TV look better. But realistically, if you have a reasonable television, turn all that stuff off. I will put a link in the show notes to my Fill Your TV article, which was just the most basic plea to get people to show the full HD picture on their television, which I don't think is unreasonable. Like, is that crazy that, they send a 1080 picture and you decide, you know what? I don't need to see the inch around the whole. Stretch it out so I don't see that part of the screen. Don't do that. That is the easiest setting that everyone can fix on a television. Everything else is much more complicated. You can calibrate your television. You can get these calibration apps, all blah, blah, blah. So I would just say start by having your picture fill your television. I'm glad that Casey figured out how to do it on his television. I'm sad that his television apparently is not listening to him when he does it.
Well, that may or may not be true. It very well could be user error. And there might be some, not even like...
Go to the menus or something instead of doing it on the fly.
Well, sure, and I have looked, but I've only spent a moment looking at it, and it very well could be that I'm just either not realizing what the setting is called or not looking in the right place. Like, I feel like I'm a reasonably bright guy, but I wouldn't completely put it past me.
You got it. It's always like 1 for 1 or dot for dot, or like you said all the things of like the various names that they call them. It's not always straightforward. I think I mentioned this in the article about like sometimes it's called size 1. On my television, it's called size 1 and size 2, which makes no freaking sense. Which one? And I would never remember which one is which. But I just never change it, and my television remembers, so I don't have to worry about that. Although actually, it's not true. I changed it recently because the stupid Wii U. I've complained about this before. In Wii mode, when you play Wii games in the Wii U, because the Wii U will play old Wii games. Wii games were standard def, right? So when the Wii U plays them, it outputs into the title safe area, like it outputs the shrunken image on your HD screen. So if you have your television calibrated correctly and you play a Wii game, there's a black border around the entire Wii game. And the only way to fix it, because Nintendo is stupid, is to change the size of your television and say, all right, while you're playing this game, go into the stupid overscan mode where you stretch everything, just so you'll get the image to fill the screen and not have weird burn in around the edges or whatever. So I have changed that a couple times for my kids to play Wii games, but in general, I leave it on the correct mode, as everybody should, because why would, you're paying for the whole picture, why not see it all?
Yeah, it does drive me nuts on the Apple TV. I forget specifically what it is, but there's something like a menu, or maybe it's the music app, something that is clearly cut off on the bottom, and it drives me berserk, but not enough that I've spent the time spelunking through the owner's manual and the menu system and all that, trying to find the right switch to flip.
Now I'm rooting for Declan to destroy your television accidentally.
Thanks, man.
Smear some peanut butter into some very important part of it.
He's going to have to get a lot taller because it's up
seriously,
on the wall. You would hate where my TV is, come to think of it, because it's above our fireplace on the wall.
It's the wrong place for it. But.
Yeah, I know. It's way higher than it should be. But there's no other good spot for it.
I see that. You ever go see like a house magazine, like interior decorating magazine or some sort of home improvement magazine? Every single freaking house they show has a television above the fireplace. And I'm like, who are these people?
Yeah, but they also, the house magazine, they also have like white couches. And like,
yeah,
even Casey is, you don't have a white couch, do you?
No, brown.
Yeah, like even Casey, who gets white everything, like you wouldn't get a white couch.
He wouldn't have a white couch for long. Now that Declan's on the move.
Yeah, well, just life exists. Like nobody can have a white couch for more than like 10 minutes before it's not white anymore. But if you look at all those magazines, all their furniture is all white because it doesn't need to be functional. It just needs to look good in a picture.
In New England, you see a lot of it because New England houses were made before televisions existed, so there's no place to put a television because there's either windows on the wall, like there's no place to put a television where you can have a couch on, you can put a television here and a couch on the opposite side. So the only place to do it is like a lot of the rooms are arranged so you can have a couch facing your fireplace because that's what they gathered around before they had television, right? And so the only place you have for your flat TV, like that's why people are excited to buy flat panel television. Now we can finally hang it over our fireplace, but then. I don't know. Doesn't your neck hurt from like looking up towards the ceiling all the time? It's the wrong place for a TV.
Oh, it's unequivocally the wrong place for the TV. But the problem is if you're sitting on the couch, the way we have the room arranged, it's a very, very wide but very short room, if that makes sense. And so the couch is facing the fireplace, just like you said, and above the fireplace is the TV because it's really the only decent place for it in the room. I mean, Marco's been there a handful of times. In terms of the room, that's the best place for the TV. And to me, the room is the priority, not the TV. And so we've put it in what is unequivocally, inarguably the wrong place because I'd rather the room look good or, be reasonably arranged over the TV be in the most perfect viewing position.
Well, you and Tiff should get together with your little society of we don't care where the television is or what. Marco's television is too high, and the Historical Society demands that he have a sound bar. And those are two kind of things that are absolutely in opposition to my value system. That like I don't care about anything in the room except the TV, and I don't have a good place for my TV either. Like I have the same problem. I have a New England house that's centered around the fireplace. I have almost no place to put my TV. Almost. I just found one place to wedge it, and I did the best I can. But at the very least, it's at the right height.
Well, and the funny thing is, my house was built in like '98 or something like that. So I don't know why the family room was
tradition. Like it is a certain style of home, and a certain style of home was made that way. Now, rich people homes and modern homes always have a room, like, a home theater room, or like a room for, like, the room that is absolutely 100% designed to say, this entire wall is for you to put all your expensive AV equipment in. And directly opposite that entire wall is seating for a bunch of people who are facing it. Exactly. Like, there's a thing and you are facing it, and there's always like one perfect seat exactly in the middle of the room, exactly in the middle of the surround speakers, where you're looking at the screen head on at exactly the right height. Every rich person house has that in it. But unless you're doing new construction or buying a house from a rich person, you don't have that. You just have a house that's made in a handful of styles, most of which, all those styles that were invented before televisions were around, flat panel or otherwise, and so they just don't have a place for a TV in them.
I'm just impressed that at the resolve of people like Casey who wall mount a TV, because we've lived in this house now for about 5 or 6 years. The TV has been in the same spot the entire time. I cannot think of a different place that we would put a TV than where the TV is.
Yeah, you've got challenges too in your room, because it's a big open room.
Right, but still, like, we've never placed the TV anywhere else. We never wanted it to be anywhere else. We put the TV there the day we moved in, and we've never moved it because it works great. And I still wouldn't wall mount it, because to me that feels like such a big commitment, and it makes everything so much less flexible. Like, I still would not wall mount it.
The cool wall mounts have like a swing arm where you can like face it in different directions and stuff. Wall mount's not a big deal. It's just the television, especially with you don't realize because you have an older television, but modern televisions are so thin and light that it's basically like a big monitor on an arm. It's actually pretty cool, and it's just a couple of bolts into the wall. It's not that big of a deal.
Mm.
Not that I'm saying you should do it. I think your TV is fine where it is, but you have the same problem. Where else could you put your television? I can't, like, unless you decide to make an artificial wall out of your television, which I have to admit is probably something I would consider in your house. Obviously not if Tiff had any say in it, but because that's the real dream. Here's the real dream of people who are.
I would love to have you come over and suggest this to Tiff.
Have people have TV sessions. Here's what you want. Obviously, you want like a dedicated room. Although I'm not that big about like a dedicated home theater room like down in the basement, because I feel like you're always going to use like whatever the upstairs room is near the kitchen. So I would make that my television room. And the television is there and it's facing me, and the speakers are all arranged in the right way and all that other stuff. But here's the important part. The whole wall that has the television and the speakers in it or in front of it or whatever, there has to be a room behind that wall. That can't be like at the end, because getting to the crap behind all your AV equipment is a nightmare. So all the fancy rich people houses have essentially all your AV equipment, and then you can walk behind it, either because the rest of the house continues behind it, or because there's just like a crawl space or an alcove or a cubby for both ventilation, and because that is the ultimate luxury. Being able to walk behind your AV equipment, see all the wires, have them all arranged like you're in a data center, like they're all perfectly routed, like Ethernet cables going from racks, and just... That is just amazing. For me, I can't get at my stuff without like contorting my body like a yoga master, getting behind there and bending down, having a little flashlight and trying. It's just impossible, because who the hell has enough room to have a room behind their television stuff? The only purpose of which is to get at the back of all your television stuff. Rich people, that's why.
The entire rest of the country. That's who.
No,
everyone else except people who live on the coasts.
No, they have big giant houses and McMansions, but unless you have a dedicated home theater room, even the people who wall mount, it's like, well, you got one shot at this, and the HDMI cable's going down through the wall, and it's going to poke out over here, and this is where you need to put your stuff. And if you ever need to mess around behind there, you're basically going to have to unplug it or slide your whole thing out, or it has to be on wheels. Like, it's a big pain. So I've only ever seen people who have dedicated rooms to also be able to have a room behind the room to get at your AV stuff, and that's where it's at.
Your next house, John.
Yeah, right. No, my never house.